The United States says if we can't control the routes that Chinese trade to Europe goes through, then we cannot do to China what we did to Russia and Germany. We can't blow up the Chinese equivalent of the Nord Stream pipeline. The plan is that if you're going to have a foreign policy of wanting to control the whole world militarily, and you're very deeply in debt, then there's just not going to be money to spend domestically. One of the problems of spending money on foreign countries right now, whether it's Ukraine or Israel or whatever, is that the budget is rising very heavily this year, heavy budget deficits, and the Federal Reserve here has just raised interest rates to over 5% for long-term rates. For the last year, you've seen the interest rate tightening going up for short-term rates, finally to maybe 4.5% a few weeks ago. But now, for the first time, even 10-year and longer government bonds are paying 5%. Now, in the 1980s and 90s, 5% was sort of a normal rate. Mortgage rates in the United States, by the way, are like, I think, 7.25%. That's a very heavy interest rate. Here's how heavy it is. Any interest rate is a doubling time. In other words, how long does it take a debt to double at a given interest rate? There's something called the rule of 72. And if you take the number 72 and you divide it by the interest rate, say 5%, then 72 over 5 is a little over 14 years. That means that the government debt, if it's refinanced at 5%, is going to double in 14 years, even if there's no budget deficit. And of course, there is a very heavy budget deficit. And this means that as the debt doubles, more and more of the government budget has to be spent on interest payments. And if you're going to keep the budget in balance, which is what the Republicans want, then if you pay more money in interest payments, there's less money to pay for the domestic economy. Well, under the Biden plan, there won't be any money paid in the domestic economy. They're talking about getting rid of Social Security. That was the dream of President Obama, to end Social Security and make people take responsibility for their retirement by saving up enough money by putting it in Wall Street's hands to do it. Well, the plan is that if you're going to have a foreign policy of wanting to control the whole world militarily, and you're very deeply in debt, then there's just not going to be money to spend domestically. And that's what finally the Republicans are looking at. Well, of course, it doesn't have to be this way. The government could simply print the money itself. It doesn't have to borrow at all. The Treasury could say, we're issuing a new coin. It could be this big, a platinum coin, and we're going to say this is $1 trillion coin. And that gives the government $1 trillion just to spend. It doesn't have to borrow, but Wall Street has contributed so much to the leading campaigns, especially to Senator Schumer of New York. The newspaper said that yesterday, Senator Schumer asked President Xi, you have to support Israel in this. Not only supporting Israel in the fight with Hamas, but most important, you have to stop this Belt and Road Initiative. You have to follow the United States plan that goes through Israel, not over railroad ship, not the plan that you have. Obviously, he's not going to take the route of Chinese trade with the West, the way the United States wants to run it through U.S. allies and places. The U.S. wants the Chinese trade to run through areas where the United States is able to make a color revolution, to do to, let's say, Central Asia, let's say Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan, to do to them what it's done to Ukraine. to somehow say we'll fight to the last Central Asian in order to stop a pipeline or a railway from China to Europe that goes through these areas. So the United States has looked at President Xi's plan for the Belt and Road Initiative and said, how can we interrupt this at every given point? How can we bring pressure on India, for instance, to stop the trade across there? How can we block the Chinese plan from going through Iran? How can we stop it from going through countries that we don't control? The United States says if we can't control the routes that Chinese trade to Europe goes through, then we cannot do to China what we did to Russia and Germany. We can't blow up the Chinese equivalent of the Nord Stream pipeline. China has to go through places where we can interrupt the trade if China does something we don't like. For instance, if it continues to make its own research in computer chips and cell phones and gets ahead, instead of letting America buy out Chinese companies and buy the monopolies, then we're going to have to treat China like we've treated Russia. I think you get the picture. So you're having the United States now all of a sudden weigh the cost of empire against the cost of what about the domestic economy in the United States? The last time an argument like this developed in American politics was in the 1960s during the Vietnam War. And at that time, the politicians framed it as guns versus butter. Are you going to spend money on the Vietnam War in Southeast Asia and let the American economy be starved? Or are you going to use the money to rebuild the American economy? Well, the power of the military-industrial complex in paying money to congressmen to support the arms industry is so much stronger than every other campaign contributor that America puts the military spending it calls national security first. Well, it's really not national security because America's definition of national security is internationalist. It says if we have to be able to control other countries, but if the cost of national security, of interfering with other countries, of the cost of staging color revolutions in all the different countries that it's done from Ukraine east, if the cost of that is so large that all of a sudden there's not money to spend in the domestic economy, then how is the United States made more secure if it deindustrializes its economy, if it runs into debt to the rest of the world, and all of a sudden, if the only industry that it has that's really competitive is the military-industrial complex? Well, we've seen in the last few months that the military-industrial complex, the arms it makes, really don't work very well. We've seen in Ukraine that the tanks it sent in have just been shot down very easily. We've seen the other arms not work. And in Israel, America helped Israel build what the Iron Dome. That was supposed to be an automatic defense system of shooting down any kind of bombs that came in. Well, the Iron Dome didn't work at all for the Hamas attack on Israel. Hamas was able to send one barrage of missiles after another in. So all of a sudden, the American defensive arms didn't work. The Patriot missiles that America has been using in Ukraine have not worked. And this has pretty much killed the foreign market for American airplanes, missile systems, defense systems. It turns out that Russia has much more efficient arms industries, but of course, you're not going to get other countries buying Russian arms if they're in the American orbit. Not only are the foreign exchange costs of American military power rising because of all the wars that it's involved in right now, but also the export of its arms are in question.
南方为什么是南方？南方为什么是这个现状？ 到底将来会是一个什么样的发展方向？大家好，我是温铁军。我们准备了一个很重要的系列课程，统称为叫做南方世界观，希望大家适当的集中点精力，能够跟我们一起把这个5讲24节的课上下来。